a rogue State Department, and you say the U.S. Constitution mandates that the U.S. Congress, elected representatives of the American people, must advise and consent the U.S. administration in matters of foreign policy. Nobody'd argue with that. They're running off by themselves.
Absolutely. When you have a situation where the people of the United States, represented by the Congress and represented by the White House, have a very clear understanding of Israel's isolated predicament, not wanting Israel to kowtow to the terrorism of the PLO. You have that kind of situation, and it's across the board. When I visit the United States Congress, I hear liberals, conservatives, Democrats, Republicans united in their support of Israel. But then when we come to watch the State Department policies, the State Department which supports an organization such as UNRWA, the United Nations Relief and Work Agency, which forces a whole generation of Palestinian Arabs to stay in refugee camps under the premise and promise of the right to return to their homes from 1948, which no longer exist. They left their homes in 48. Yes. Not because Israel wanted that to happen. It happened during the war. Instead of being resettled, the United States State Department, together with the Canadian Department of External Affairs and the European Union, support a system of keeping them in the camps and keeping the cauldron hot, and the expectation that they're going to replace Israel hot. And that policy has to be questioned, because it's not a policy. There was never a decision by the United States Congress or by the White House, hey, we're going to support the idea that the Arabs can come back to all the homes they left in Jerusalem, or the villages they left in the Galil, or the Negev. There was never a decision like that. But the State Department for the last 50 years has been pushing that idea in an undignified way. And the time has come for the American people who do want fairness to Israel to speak up and say, excuse me, we cannot support such a policy.
Okay, some Americans actually do. I mean, they oppose Colin Powell's statements. They oppose the idea of giving the Saudis a free pass. I say some. Mm-hmm. I'm thinking some right-thinking Jewish people, some Christian Zionists. Some people don't buy into the State Department's thing.
Most people assume they have an attitude of that's the way it is. Uh-huh. We're recording this interview on the 65th anniversary of Kristallnacht.
Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Kristallnacht.
When the Germans broke windows and burnt synagogues.
What they did was to establish the precedent of what would happen in World War II.
Yes.
That they would kill off Jews and see how the world would respond. And the world responded, and even the world's Jews responded, especially in America, with nothing. No. We are a generation later. We say on Passover, Ela shebechol dor vador omdim aleinu lechalotenu. Every generation, an entity comes up that wants to destroy us.
Yep.
And the Palestinian Authority, the PLO, is nothing more than an agent of the Arab League, funded through Saudi Arabia. And remember this roadmap that Mr. Powell talks about all the time, adopted March 30th, 2002, the day after the Passover massacre in Netanya. What's it based on? Paragraph 2, the Saudi plan, which talks about the right of return promoted through UNRWA, funded by the U.S. government and the Western European countries. The idea that Israel would be replaced by an Arab entity. And if you want me to show you the maps currently put out by the PA, the Palestinian Authority, Israel is eliminated. You cannot have it both ways. The problem is that people don't take what Arabs say seriously enough. As a journalist, when I was studying my field of journalism as a young man, I interviewed William Shirer, who wrote the book The Rise and Fall of the Third Reich. He was the correspondent for the New York Times in Berlin during the Nazi era. And we asked him what it was like to hear Hitler's words and to report them. How could you remain neutral, I asked him. He says, I wasn't neutral, I was objective. I wrote down everything that Hitler said, reported in the New York Times, and people didn't hear it. Advent of the Palestinian National Authority. Every word has been accessible what Arafat and his people around him have been saying, not only Arafat. And it has not been noted. Our agency, Israel Resource News Agency, is ready to dispatch speakers throughout the Western world to present to you what they're saying in the Arabic language to their people. Palestinian Broadcast Corporation, until 1998, funded through USAID, the United States Agency for International Development, not by some Arab kooks, but by Western democracies. Because it was only words. Words have power. And that's what we try to say. Words have power. Well, the State Department pretends to be a middleman. They tend to be a meddleman. They tend to meddle in affairs and have no idea what's flying. Yeah. The idea that you can buy off people in the short run and think that will create allies, yeah. That's how you create adversaries. Because what you have is a situation which is very clear. The State Department comes to Iraq, offers them oodles of money to fight Iran, builds up their military potential, and think that's it. They're going to return the guns, you know. It doesn't work that way. When you pay people off, they think in the Middle East, they think of you as a sucker. I grew up in America, so you know. You give somebody money for nothing. You're going to fight. You're fighting the war against Iran, and they just take the money and say thank you, and they say, can we also have Kuwait? And that is something. And do you remember when the American ambassador to Kuwait to Iraq said, they don't mean it.
The lady. Yeah.
Absolutely. And this is the whole thing of a lack of American understanding of the Middle East mentality. We Jews understand Arabs. Isaac understands Ishmael. Isaac understands the Ishmaelite curse, that this is a wild man. A wild man. But when you look in Genesis, how Ishmael is also the one who goes along with Abraham, according to our rabbinic sources, to receive the angels, to train him in the art of hospitality. So it's a wild man who knows how to be hospitable. When I interviewed Yasser Arafat for 3 hours, the man was wiggling in his seat, being so friendly, giving juice, giving coffee, the friendliest guy in the world. Now we go back to Iraq, we have to understand that Saddam Hussein and Yasser Arafat have been like this. But not only has Saddam Hussein been supporting Arafat, but Arafat has been supplying the troops for Saddam Hussein and now for the war against America. And guess where they're doing their military training? In the UNRWA camps in Lebanon.
Oh, boy.
UNRWA camps supported by the United States government.
All right, let me try to follow the money. So the American taxpayer pays us the taxes to Washington. Washington helps support UN UNRWA camps. The UNRWA camps train the foreign fighters that are going to Iraq and killing American troops.
Precisely.
Why are we paying for that?
Because you don't know about it. You know what my theme is, Zola? Yeah. Let my people know. People do not know what's flying. In a world of superficiality and MTV paganism, people have forgotten that God wants people to know. People to know about the land, about themselves, about responsibility. The United States government giving money to terrorists? Well, that was a decision by Congress? Was there a congressional resolution XXX to support that? There never was. And same thing, did Congress ever decide they're going to support Saddam? Never, but it just happened. Short-term thinking, just to defeat Iran without thinking what was going to be next. What would you do with the guns in their potential? Do you remember that the Israeli government on June 10th, 1981, decided to create a few bombs over the Iraqi nuclear facility, which was being created by the Western nations. Not by the Arab nations, by the Western nations.
Yes, France especially.
Especially France. And Vice President George Bush, at the time, called for a boycott of Israel after that. Well, we beat around the bush. And I think Bush Jr. has been much appreciative for what Israel did.
Oh, yes. We'd be fighting a nuclear war, I suppose. So what's your hunch? What's coming up? What's the the big picture. Are we going to establish democracies in the Middle East? Are we going to lose to the Islamists or what?
There's no question about it that George W. Bush is committed to democratization of the Middle East and to the defeat of the Arab totalitarian states that surround Israel. There's no question about it that the U.S. State Department opposes that. There's no question about it that the U.S. Congress is supportive of the President's position. The question is, for the viewing audience of this program, where are the American people?